March! When the seeding begins. Hi everyone, this is Will O'Toole welcoming you to another edition of Park Ridge Sports History. This week I'd like to spend a shout out to the FDU Knights, who are one of the first teams to qualify for March Madness, albeit it's on a technicality, but the Knights will take it and so will New Jersey fans. And also, I want to delve into some, let's say, footnote people, baseball players in baseball history who all share one thing in common, and that's a college degree. And I'm going to all of different backgrounds, different colleges, and just see what happened and how baseball either motivated them or helped them get to their goal after retiring from the great game, the national pastime. Anyway, special shout out to Tobin Anderson and the FDU Knights, who qualified for the tournament by winning, ready for this, the Northeast Conference. They won a semifinal game, which actually puts them into the finals. And they will play Merrimack, who finished first in the division, courtesy of winning 10 straight games. They finished 12-4 in the Northeast Conference, and FDU actually finished second with 10 wins. Anyway, FDU's going, even though they will be playing at the higher-seeded Merrimack, and before the final game is ended, for the simple reason that Merrimack, this is their first year at the Division I level. And apparently by NCAA policy and rules, first team or first year Division I schools cannot qualify for the postseason. So they cannot even go to the NIT, let alone the NCAA tournament. All right, good news for the FDU Knights, who are in their first year under Tobin Anderson, who came from St. Thomas Aquinas, a D2 school, and brought with him a couple of very good ball players. And I think Tyler Anderson and Roberts, can't remember his last name, but they came over from Division I. Let me just see if I can find them here. But they came over from St. Thomas Aquinas and brought with them a winning attitude, to the point where the Knights won 19 games against a pretty difficult schedule. They won 9 games outside of their conference, which is pretty impressive. Well, actually, 9 games, probably 8 games outside their conference. I just want to run this down. Merrimack is actually coached by a Jersey guy by the name of Joe Gallo, but from Millville, New Jersey. But Tobin Anderson comes over. It's Grant Singleton and Dimitri Roberts. I think I messed up the first one, and I apologize. They came over with Tobin Anderson to the FDU Knights, and I just want to run this over. FDU, I was following them early because they started off the year playing, ready for this, this was their schedule. Loyola Chicago, they played Manhattan from the MAC, they played Pitt, lost to Pitt, and Pitt, of course, is rumored to be, well, they're one of the teams that are going to get an at-large bid probably to the NCAA tournament if they don't win the ACC tournament. So there's actually a Big Five, Power Five school that they played. They did play them in Pitt. Not bad. They lost by 22. I actually saw a little bit of that game. I think they were in the game in the second half, maybe the first 5 minutes. And they played competitively, and then really what happened was Pitt just wore them down with just a deeper bench. But they lose by 22. I think they had that game down to like a 12-point game with about 12 minutes to play, if I do recall. Then they played last year's Cinderella team, St. Peter's, lost to them, lost to Hartford, which is interesting because I think Hartford is downgrading their basketball program. They're going to leave Division I and go either Division II or III. Played a team from that mid-major, St. Joe's, and beat them 97-80. St. Joe's, of course, right now they're struggling. Beat Ivy Leaguer Columbia. I did watch that game. I think I saw that game. Yeah, it was on a Friday night. They showed that. It was back and forth. I didn't see the finish. I probably fell asleep. But actually, FDU won that in overtime, 76-73. It was a pretty good game, obviously back and forth. Beat Nidget, lost to Richmond, again, another team in the same conference as St. Joe's and Dayton, beat Merrimack in their first meeting, and then, of course, go into their Northeast Conference. Now, problem is, more than likely, FDU is going to be in the play-in 16 seed game. And then the winner of that will meet probably the number one team. They will be a number one seed, but probably the number one team that the NCAA committee sees in the entire field of 68. It is not going to be an easy game if FDU can somehow manage to win that opening seeded game in Dayton, either on a Tuesday or Wednesday night. But hey, kudos to them, because under Greg Herenda, they do win back in 2019. That was their first postseason win in the NCAA tournament. And they would go on. I think they beat Prairie State. And then, of course, they went on and lost to Gonzaga. Lost by over 25 points. But you know what? It's a moral victory as well for the FDU Knights. Now, anybody recalls, Tom Green brought this team to a couple of NCAA tournaments in the 80s. And one of them was a classic. And when they played Michigan in the year of Villanova, 1985, and they were winning, beating Michigan in Dayton on a Friday night, and the country was watching. They were, I don't know whether they were 16 seed. They probably were. They were obviously a lower seeded team, but I remember watching, and I don't know whether they showed the whole game then. This is 1985, and even then, really, the NCAA, what they did, and I'm going to go off on a tangent, they would show early games on Channel 2 and ESPN, okay? Then they would break, and you wouldn't see any games. And then later on, about 1986, 87, ESPN got rights to those, let's say, late afternoon games. But for a while there, this March Madness was created when they really opened the field, seeded the schools. Because remember, in the early 80s, I think they went from originally 25 during the UCLA glory years. They had 25 teams. Then they expanded to, let's say, 32. Then they went to 48. And then finally, drips and drabs, they went to the golden 64. Now, you can say, I like the 64 because everyone had to play the same amount of games to get through the whole thing. I guess adding the 68, what they've done was they got those close, but maybe not good enough big-time schools from, let's say, the Big Ten, the Big East, the SEC. They give them that 11th seed game where they have to square off to meet the 6th seeded team in the first. And then what they've done is they've been able to add maybe a couple of mid-major teams by virtue of having an extra 16 seed thing. I think what eventually they're going to do is take all the lower rung conferences, which unfortunately the Northeast Conference, which is what FDU plays in. And I almost can see this. They're going to put all those teams, they'll give them maybe a couple more games by doing this and a couple more entrants, and have them all face off in that 16th seed. Then maybe allow that 11th seed a little bit more leeway. And then this way you can have 2-3 more teams from the lower schools. And maybe by virtue of having 4 11 round or 11 seeded teams playing against each other, or 8 11 seeded teams playing each other, in which you'll get the 4 11 seeds from, who would play then the number 6 seeded team. You can add some power schools or mid-majors there and make even more teams, and let's say the committee take some of the pressure off them. Eventually, you're probably going to see everybody make the tournament, and it would be just outrageous. It would be just fun. I've often thought that they should just go up to 96. I wouldn't want to see the NIT squeezed out of it, but you could make the NIT something else, or make the NIT something at the very beginning of the year where you add, you bring in 64 teams and have it as a preseason NIT, maybe start it, I don't know, in October, and then go from there. Now, then you'd have kids playing, let's say 40, 45 games instead of, I think Duke one year played 41 games, basically half a basketball season when they won the championship. Anyway, as I go off in a tangent, kudos to Tobin Anderson and the FDU Knights, who have already qualified, can win the tournament, and I'm rooting for them to do that against Merrimack in Merrimack. But the nice thing is, whether they win it or lose it, they're going dancing in March Madness in a couple of weeks. Congratulations to them. And now I'd like to shift attention. Well, I'm a Seton Hall guy. Don't know what their chances are. Did get a big, you're going to laugh when I say this. I thought they could play even with Xavier. Creighton owns them. Marquette owns them. Providence is a lot like Seton Hall. And I think yesterday, with that, where the lead expanded to 30 points, I didn't think they'd get 30 points lead against Providence. Nonetheless, they do beat a quad 1 team, which gives them Memphis, Rutgers, Connecticut, and Providence. Now, I really think they're going to have to win the tournament to even be thinking about going dancing. However, be as it may, and of course, I'm always believing in miracles happening, especially for my teams, my school. I'm going to say this. I believe they played DePaul first round, all right, which I actually think is good. Gives them a chance to almost like warm up, gives them a chance to get that 18th win. First of all, if they don't beat DePaul, they don't deserve to go, all right? I do hope that they take or accept an NIT bid, because I think it would be good for Shaheen Holloway and the program and the players to just get more experience and all the rest. Plus, it'd be a lot of fun for the fans if they feel like doing it. I know a couple of years ago, because of COVID, the team elected not to play. I could understand that. You find out later that they really spent about 6 months together. 6 months really quarantined from the rest of the school. So I can understand that. But going to the NIT would be a lot of fun. And look at what it did for Xavier last year. I watched Xavier march through that, no pun intended, through the NIT. They beat a couple of teams on the road, notably Vanderbilt in overtime, trailing, all right, and wind up winning the NIT after they got rid of their coach. And then they had their replacement coach win basically 5 games in the NIT. And then, of course, they hired Sean Miller, to be their coach this year. And you can see, to me, you see what it did for Xavier. Here's the thing now, just getting back. I think if Seton Hall plays DePaul, I think, and I'm hoping that they play Xavier. Now, I know this sounds crazy. I actually thought that they match up well with Xavier. And I was really disappointed that Seton Hall didn't beat Xavier at home, because to be honest with you, I was banking on a win there, especially with Zach Fremantle from Teaneck Bergen Catholic being out with the foot injury. That's a big hurt to the team, because I have to be honest with you, he was playing great basketball until the injury he sustained there. Anyway, they lose that game. Yeah, it was really a tight, great game. And then, of course, they lose to Villanova, who I have been saying they just don't match up with Villanova. I mean, anybody who saw this, Villanova hit all 16 of their free throws against Seton Hall in their last home game of the year. I mean, that's when you don't have anything going for you there. But they really don't match up. I know this sounds funny. They really don't match up well with Villanova. But at least, maybe, if they have to play Villanova, they play them in the championship. Now, look, here's what I'm thinking. They beat DePaul. I think they play Xavier. If they beat DePaul, they will play Xavier. I think they can get by Xavier. If they have to play Creighton, nope. If they have to play Marquette, Nope, it'll take miracles there. Not that I won't be rooting for them and all the rest of it, but I'm just telling you, they don't match up with those two teams. Uh, they believe me, there's a reason why Creighton destroyed them twice. There is a reason why Marquette destroyed them twice, and especially at home when things seem to be going well for Seton Hall. They just do not match up with those teams at all. That being said, if they can steal a couple of wins here and get to 20, who knows what the committee does? Especially when we've had all these upsets prior to the conference tournaments with some of these schools. Okay. All right. So shout out to FDU. Shout out to Seton Hall. Shout out to the March Madness. Oh, shout out to Rutgers, which will be going to the big dance. I don't think there's any doubt. Right now, they're probably playing for seeding. If they do well in the Big Ten, I know that I've seen them as they went from basically being on the outs to being one of the last teams invited to playing in that, let's say, 11 seeded game before you get to play number number 6, pardon me. And now with a couple of wins, who knows? Rutgers could be an 8 seed. Oop! I shouldn't curse them that way, because let's face it, if I'm going to do anything, if I'm going to get to the tournament, and I think the worst seeding, and I think it kind of proves it, you never want to be 8-9 because it really is all right. 8-9, yes. It means that you're one of the top 32 or 36 teams in the league, but I'd rather be 11 or number 12, because that means I'm not meeting the number 1 seed. And there is a big difference between the number 1 seed and a number 10 or a number 11, or let's say a number 6 seed or a number 5 or even a number 4, because you're talking about elite top 4 teams with the number 1 seed. Even number 4 and number 3, you're talking about teams that are in double digits in, let's say, the top 20. You got a better shot anyway, even has a lower seed. I'll take that any day. All right. But Rutgers, but they theoretically, they probably could play, if they do well in the tournament, probably up to a number 8, maybe even a little higher. And imagine if they won it. Okay. Which would take quite a bit, because they got to get by Purdue, and that would be pretty tough. I think Michigan State's always tough, and Michigan is always tough. All right, and there's Ohio State. I could see them picking somebody off. I know Northwestern's had a good season, but I could see Northwestern or a school like that being picked off early. And Wisconsin is fighting, very similar to Seton Hall, though I think they are definitely in a better shape than Seton Hall as to making the March Madness tournament. In reality, Seton Hall has to win the whole thing, Big East tournament. All right, let's turn our attention to some baseball. And first of all, everyone is playing right now, so I figured this. I'd show a cartoon on spring training, and then we always assume here in the Northeast, everybody going to Florida. But really, I bet you a lot of teams like really going to Arizona, because they don't have to worry about the weather as much. So here in Arizona, spring training in Arizona, where it rains baseball instead of water. Okay. Just a little fun thing, just nonsensical, but I think it hits home the point of Arizona. You got beautiful, dry, arid weather. It's good. It's good for your sinuses. If you're going to Arizona for spring training, you're going to get beautiful days, not a lot of humidity, heat, yes, probably temperatures similar to Florida, 70, 80s. Florida, though, does get cold. And with this crazy weather that we've had this winter, Arizona looks a lot better than Florida right now in terms of going to a spring training game. But with that, I figured I'd show you a couple players I'd like to focus on today. Now, the ones I'm going to share some of my expertise, and I put that in quotations. And I got to be honest with you, you're going to laugh when I say this, but Jim French and Don Kessinger and Bob Barton are three individuals who refresh me. Now, I'm not going to focus on Bob Barton so much as I am with a fellow by the name of Kurt McCaskill, and I'm going to focus on him. Now, I do remember him in the major leagues. He was on those 79, those late 79, 80 teams with California that had Reggie, but he was on the California Angels. Just came up a little bit later on that. 82, the Angels had a couple of guys. Well, they win their first title in 79. They win the Western Division. They have David Frost as one of their pitchers. They have, of course, Nolan Ryan. They had signed Rod Carew. So they had Brian Downing converted from being a catcher to a pretty good hit in the outfielder. Now, not great defensively, Brian Downing, but he turned himself into a hitting machine there for a couple of years with the Angels. And actually, he had one of the wildest batting stances. He changed his whole stance. It was very open. And when we say it's an open stance, that means he's a right-handed hitter. So he takes his left foot, if you can imagine your left foot, and he opens up his entire torso to the pitcher. So instead of his feet basically being parallel, they're almost at his were anyway, almost like a 90-degree angle, probably more like a 75-degree angle. Nevertheless, it opened up his body to the pitcher, and he felt that he could see the ball coming in. Well, got to be honest with you, it worked because he does make an all-star team. He does become a pretty impressive hitter for about 3-4 years after being just a mediocre hitter during his stay with Chicago and then being traded to California. And then, of course, he is moved to the outfield. So catcher, okay arm, plays the outfield. And, of course, there is that one famous play with him and Fred Lynn, who was also on that 79 team, where they both converge on a ball and they both hit into the fence. Lynn comes away with the ball, but wow, they collide. They both tumble to the ground, and Lynn holds up the ball. You can see that every once in a while on Major League Baseball productions, or remember the old This Week in Baseball. Nevertheless, Kurt McCaskill would come up later, and this was his big claim to fame. I remember it. Anyway, McCaskill was a hockey player, but I didn't know this. I didn't know he was from Canada, number one. I did remember that he was a hockey player, and he was pretty good. I don't know whether he had turned down offers to play in the NHL or not, but never knew this. He actually went to the University of Vermont on a scholarship. And I do believe this, just judging from his stats, he wasn't a bad pitcher. In fact, in 86, he won 17 games, had a 3.36 ERA. Now, he does lead the league in 1991 with the most losses in the American League. He had 19 against 10 wins, but kind of resurrects himself over the last few years. Basically, he was done by age 31. But between 32, 33, and age 35, he won 16 games, lost 21. All right, not bad, not great. But basically, he ends his career 106, 108, 4.12 ERA. Baseball Reference has him as 12-12. Wasn't a bad pitcher because despite that 19-loss season, and of course his career kind of going downhill from age 32, he won 12 games for the Angels in 1990. He won 15 games for the Angels in 1989. And of course, he first came up, he won 12 as a rookie in 1985 and 17 in 1986. Not bad. Not bad. And he did total over 200 innings 1, 2, 3 times in his career. Not a bad career. And listen, as I always say, it's 106 and 108. All right, a losing record. Had some winning seasons. I would take that in a heartbeat because I never got past, let's say, Little League. And this guy's playing on the top. Now, he does play for the University of Vermont hockey. Kind of wild because I know that Vermont did have baseball. I don't know whether they still do. but they had baseball teams back in the 80s and earlier in that. They had some good seasons that I do recall. So Kurt McCaskill, you know, Kurt McCaskill with the Angels. All right, now I want to get to the other two guys. First of all, I'm going to start with Bob Barton. Now, I wasn't able to find too much on Barton. Here's how everything actually started, as I do recall. Besides Baseball Reference, and of course we can always go to Wikipedia, I guess, as a go-to place initially, but I like to now use, and I've been reading other sites, and one of them is, of course, an organization I used to belong to, and then I let my membership go, and that's Society of American Baseball Research. But they have some really good, and I would say rather intense essays on individual ball players. Now, everything is volunteer. These are all contributions by baseball nuts, kind of like me. But I was reading about Jim French. Don't ask me how I got onto Jim French. I might have been, I know how it was. I was on a Twitter, and one of the guys was saying, name your favorite Texas Ranger catcher of all time. So I actually wrote back to him and said, hey, listen, can it also include the new Washington Senators? New because the old Washington Senators moved to Minnesota. And then baseball, just like nature abhors a vacuum, they put a baseball team into Washington in the 60s. They became the new Washington Senators. Still love their logo. Actually, the Washington Nationals have their W. I wish they would still call them the Senators instead of the Nationals, to tell you the truth. But because actually the old Senators, the ones that are in Minnesota today, used to be called the Nats. So they basically had both nicknames and used interchangeably. So I wrote to him and I said, if we can include old Senators, I just remember a guy by the name of Jim French who played and toiled with the Washington Senators. So then I did a little study on baseball reference rather, and discovered that he actually never played for the Texas Rangers. His whole career was with the Washington Senators. And I was thinking about him because they had another player. I always thought this was funny. My brothers and I used to play Sports Illustrated Baseball, which was their game that rivaled AP Baseball or whatever it was called. It was a card action game. What made the SI better in some respects is that all the players were on team charts while those were individual cards. What made that game a little bit better was that if a player got traded, it was just easy to trade a card. Here's the thing. The 1970 Washington Senators, I remember my brother said, hey, you know what? We're going to play this game as realistically as we can. So if a player was traded from a particular team, we're going to take that player and put him on the other team and all the rest of it. Well, Sports Illustrated didn't do in their initial set 25 roster players. They only had 20. However, the Washington Senators, during the mad scramble from 1970 to about 72, because we got all three games that Sports Illustrated had, 70, 71, and 72. By 72, they actually cheapened the game this way. Instead of having colored charts of teams, they went to player cards, and they were all black and white. And it made it very difficult. And you had to put the card on the baseball diamond and then pretty much locate. It was very cheaply done. Still a good game, but very cheaply done. They did improve it in terms of defense. So that was one good thing. Like they gave pitchers more outs and all the rest of it. That's for another day when I explain those games. Anyway, we had the Washington Senators charts. So here my brother's saying, hey, we're going to play this the right way. Okay, we'll play it the right way. And here's what happened. We're going to trade all the players that got traded, and we're going to make these teams, construct them out of the players that they got there. Well, with the exception of Jim French, every guy on the Washington Senator roster was traded. There was nobody left to play. And the players that they traded for weren't even available from the other teams. Washington had made a lot of, let's say, minor league deals for some of these players, or like the SI game having only 20 players and you're missing, 5 of them, 20% of your team. Uh, really, those Washington had managed to trade for the 20% of the players that didn't make the roster. So here's on that chart. Here is Ken McMullen. He goes to the Angels. He's gone. And the players they got back weren't on the charts. The only guy, Ed Stroud even went, I think, to the White Sox or the Indians. Joe Coleman went to the Tigers. Aurelio Rodriguez went to the Tigers along with Eddie Brinkman. And then you had players like Darryl Knowles, who had a good season and Dick Bosman. Darryl Knowles had a good season with the Senators. He gets traded brilliantly. The A's picked him up in a trade. So Jim French, I got to be honest with you, he makes the list as a guy I always felt sorry for. But ready for this, Jim French has an interesting bio on Sabre. And I didn't know this about him. I always felt sorry for him. Jim French grew up in Ohio on a farm that the parents owned. And actually, his father worked in Pennsylvania. They were on the border of basically Ohio and Pennsylvania. And his father worked in a factory. I don't know whether it was a metal factory, whatever. He worked in a factory while his mother, Jim French's mom, and his uncle toiled on the farm. And they had quite a spread, apparently. Not only did they have acres of land, but they actually expand the land. And I think it was a dairy farm because Jim French milked the cows, did all the farming stuff before he went to school. Now I'm reading about this, and this is a great article. And of course, I can't, let me just see if I have it here. I'm going to give the author credit here because I think it's only fair. So article was written by Paul Hoffman, all right, about Jim French. He was born in Warren, Ohio. Make a long story longer, and I do like this picture of him. I think I might have had this 71. They have the 1971 baseball card. The only reason I didn't want to show that is because he only played a few games in 1971. So anyway, here's Jim French. He works in the morning, goes to school. Now he's in Warren. His school was 30 miles away. That's amazing. I mean, I did work in a school that was 30 miles away. And believe me, and I'm driving it on a major highway. It wasn't so bad to commute. But can you imagine way back now, 1956, 1957? I'm sure that access to the school is a little bit tougher. Maybe they did pick them up by a school bus, which means that the travel was even harder, more difficult. All right. So you're talking about a guy waking up probably at 3 a.m, doing about 2-3 hours of chore work, then going to school 30 miles away. Not only that, but he plays sports, one of them being baseball. He gets a look, and he actually goes to college on a scholarship, I believe on a scholarship. He does get some help on a scholarship. And I think he went to Ohio University, marries his bride from high school, or maybe he met her in college or whatever. But he's married, going to school, playing baseball, and working on a career. And he wasn't in some fresh air classes. He was taking math. He was, I think, was going to be an accountant. Oh, and here's back up a little bit. Working with his grandfather, had so much respect for his grandfather. His grandfather said to him, look, I've got 2 dreams for you, because apparently his father and his grandfather were both pretty good semi-pro players. He says, I'd love for you to be a major league baseball player and a lawyer. So French goes to school. He gets a look out of Ohio University. Smartly, the Indians and the Reds were both interested in him, but he doesn't sign with the Reds. He signs with the Senators, perhaps because he knew that the Senators were a terrible franchise, and maybe he has, hey, listen, you got to look at it that way and say, I'm watching the Reds. They seem to have a pretty good core of players. Let me see if I can go to the Senators and move my way up faster to the pros as a catcher. Latches on to the Senators. Actually goes 2 for 2 with 2 walks in his debut game. Now, he never really hits too well. And actually, French says, I wasn't used all that much. And it was a shame because he said, probably if I got a few more at bats and got into more games, I might have gotten into a rhythm. But he said, not playing so much kind of probably hurt his batting average and his skill at the plate. Okay. Defensively, he wasn't that bad. I didn't realize this. No, because Sports Illustrated didn't give him too many good grades as a defensive player. Anybody who ever played the game knew that Johnny Bench had the highest of any catcher. He was a 6 with an I for an arm, which means that he was deadly on base runners. I'll talk about that another day. Jim French, I don't even think had a plus number next to him as a catcher. Anyway, to make a long story even longer, ready for this? Jim French, here's the interesting thing about him, all right? He hit in 1965, he hit 297 in 13 games. He was actually 11 for 37 with 1 home run, 7 RBIs. Then goes down to the minor leagues, has to work his way back up over the course of the next 2 years. Finally comes up in 68, plays 59 games, and hit 194, again with 1 home run. But here's what I want to say. His on-base percentage improves greatly in 1969 and 1970. And he played in exactly 63 and 69 games, basically gets the same amount of at-bats. Now, doesn't hit that well. He hits 184 and then 211. But he draws more walks in 69 and 70, 79 walks than he does in his entire career before or after that. Now, why do I say that? Well, who's his manager in 69 and 70? It's none other than Ted Williams, who was always this way, disciplined. He always said, you should take the first pitch in your first at bat against the pitcher, just to see how fast he is, what it looks like, and all the rest of it. If you ever read The Science of Hitting, he'll tell you that. He'll explain that to you. And he always talked about, way back in the 60s, how important it was for the walk and taking pitches and doing all the things that they're doing today. He's saying this in the 60s. All right. Now, even though Jim French, it would have been interesting to see maybe if Ted Williams, now he had another guy on that team, one of my favorite players of all time, Paul Casanova. They were as night and day. Casanova was from, I believe, Cuba. He was like 6'5", really muscled, makes the All-Star team, I believe, in either 68 or 69. Jim French, kind of squatty. He does look like a farmer, what you imagine a farmer, about 5'8", 185. So he's squat. He's like that typical Yogi Berra catcher. But anyway, he realized by 1971, his last year, I think he had some injuries, and he said, you know what? Can't do it anymore. He goes back to school. Not only is he an accountant, he goes back to school to become a lawyer, and then basically opens up or joins a law firm in Chicago. And so his baseball career, even though I would give an arm and a leg for his baseball career, right, pales in comparison to a college degree, not only a college degree, but 2 majors. One, let's say, in accounting, and the other in in becoming a lawyer. Pretty impressive. All doing this while when he was going to school, playing ball, being married, and taking some very arduous classes in mathematics. Pretty impressive. And then, I don't know if I have time, but I just want to pick up, here's Don Kessinger. Now, if you're a Met fan, you know this, what I'm talking about. It was either Kessinger or Bud Harrelson. And Kessinger was a pretty good defensive player, made actually the All-Star teams and started for the All-Stars in 1969 in Washington. And then Bud Harrelson makes the 70 and 71 squad, and I believe started over Kessinger in those two. But they were mostly the same player. The thing was, Kessinger was very tall and lean. Bud was a little bit smaller. Bud probably had the better arm. Kessinger, why I'm picking it up, and maybe I'll finish this for next week as well. Kessinger he's born in Arkansas, goes to Ole Miss. And the reason he went to Ole Miss is because Arkansas didn't have a baseball program. But he goes to Ole Miss on a basketball scholarship after being a 3-star sport at his Arkansas high school in football, baseball, and basketball. Pretty impressive. Then after his career is over, and he was a pretty good player, all right, what stinks for him is that he was part of that 69 Cub team, if you want, and really like a 258 ball player, hitter, good defense. Maybe if he had played for, I tell you, if he had played for the Orioles, he might have been Mark Belanger. Nevertheless, he toils for the Cubs. He goes back. I believe he managed with the White Sox, but he actually goes back to Ole Miss and becomes their baseball coach as well. So, 2 players I brought up, Jim French, Don Kessinger, and Kurt McCaskill. Look, there's life after baseball. But their life in baseball began because they played some sort of ball at the college level. Hey everyone, this is Will O'Toole thanking you again for listening to me drone on about some of my boyhood memories, especially my 1970 baseball cards. See you next week with another edition. Bye.